Alrighty, so today I'm going to be talking about Cad Bane. This was a leader I played a bit with in set 2. I also had a deck guide out for a red Cad Bane deck then. I think it's gotten a couple of new pieces that are going to make it more appealing to play in this set. Not only that, I think the Boba ban recently opens up some space for yellow villain leaders. So decided to do kind of an update to this deck. This is a first pass. There is going to be a deck list here, but the idea is not just that it's like definitely the best 50 cards. It's kind of a starting point for me. There's also going to be a whole section in this video about other cards that I'm considering, and there's a lot of them. So think of this more as a blueprint, things that I'll be working on. There's no 10 card sideboard right now. It's a maybe board with a bunch of extras, and we'll be talking about how we can play this deck, why I pick certain cards, why I don't sometimes, and kind of everything in between. But before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. I am closing in on 4K subs, so that's pretty exciting. And definitely check out the Patreon if you're looking for some more content from me. This deck is up there, and it will continue to be updated there. That's where I kind of post all my live decks and all the work that I'm doing on them behind the scenes. All right, so why Cad Bane? So first of all, his ability is kind of really solid at helping you control board, especially against unit-based decks. So think aggro decks, mid-range unit decks, both of which I think are going to be pretty prominent now. I think Boba being gone is opening up a whole world of mid-range that didn't exist prior to that. And I think Cad Bane can fight pretty well into these aggro decks like Sabine, anything that might come up with like Kylo or Asajj, but then also certainly compete with these other mid-range unit decks. Board control is very important, and he enables that really well. Yellow villain, we know that the core there is pretty powerful from the last few months of seeing Boba kind of reign supreme, but that shell in general is strong, and we're definitely using a lot of pieces from this powerful yellow villain shell. So that's kind of where we start with Cad. The leader deploy being 6 is not my favorite. I know I've talked a lot about 6-cost deploys being kind of behind the curve, but again, it comes down a bit to like Boba not being around anymore. I think being in that 6-cost deploy is not as disadvantage as it used to be. And now the question is, why red? Well, basically because of Tark Town. The deck you'll see has very few actually red cards in it. I've been asked many times, why am I not just playing a mono yellow deck? Get to play Cunning, get to play, I don't know, Bodhi, Cantina Bouncer. All that's nice. A lot of those units aren't even Underworld anyway, though, which definitely, when we talk about it more about the actual strategy, I think is incredibly important, that basically the entire deck, or almost the entire deck, is Underworld to kind of keep his ping damage going, because the moment it stops, you kind of fall behind, and then his pings become way less good in the future. But Tark Town is kind of the key to this whole strategy, being able to at any point basically kill a play. Like you can do this from the first turn. I often do, like especially against like aggro decks. You just like kill their first turn. From then on, you're just going to be ahead in units. Your pings become better because of this, because you're ahead in units. You're able to create efficient trades, and then you'll be able to ping the one unit they have remaining, right? If they have 2 units, they can kind of decide what is going to happen with that Cad Bane damage, but they only have 1 unit. There's no decision process anymore. Tark Town is incredibly valuable in making this run more smoothly in conjunction with ambush units and other ways to kind of keep that board as condensed as possible. So yeah, that's why red. So here's the first pass list. We'll talk about like the maybe board, the sideboard stuff at the end. But this is kind of where I'm starting. It is very similar in many places to kind of how I was running this deck in the previous cycle, with some notable changes, especially with like the new cards. But we'll look at like the early drops first. We got Greedo, Cartel Spacers, Crafty Smugglers, Bazine, and Cloud Rider. So it's a lot, right? It's 12. I think that's kind of where I'd like to be. I do want like a bit of a good density of early plays because of how important it is to just have a unit out on the first turn. Especially with Tark Town, you can basically kill any turn when your opponent plays. So I'm opting like Greedo. He's 1, so it's like very clean to play him. Crafty Smuggler is probably my favorite turn 1 play here, but I do like the space angle that Spacer provides, especially if we're going to see more aggressive space decks pop up. And I think we can even up the count of space units. We'll talk about that later. Bazine is probably my least favorite turn 1 play, although it's still serviceable and is definitely something you can be playing later. And Cloud Rider is kind of a removal unit. Like, it's just, you play it, you trade with something, right? Especially if they only have 3 health. Sometimes you're able to enable that trade and then use Cad Bane's ability on something else, which is really nice, right? It can kind of ambush for 4, which is just quite powerful. And on the 3-drop slot, unit-wise, we've got Boba Fett, Punishing 1, and Black Sun Starfighter. You know, Boba Fett and Punishing 1, non-negotiable. Punishing 1 is one of 2 red cards in this deck. They're just like the best on-rate underworld units you're going to find. Black Sun I've liked quite a bit in general, though. Having a Space Sentinel that can also just shoot a damage at something is pretty nice. There aren't a ton of other 3-drops, unfortunately, that can fit this role. We'll mention a few later, though. If we look up top, also, we got Hotshot Blasters. You know, the card's just awesome. It helps change math a lot of time and help you close out games. McClunky, maybe the best card in this entire deck. Not only does it do the 3 and work with all your underworld units, but it also triggers Cad Bane's ability. So that's 4 whole damage from your 1 cost event. And do remember, you have to do the 3 damage first with McClunky. You can't do the Cad Bane 1 first. With ambush units, you can order it however you want because they're both when played. So like you can choose the ambush when played or Cad Bane's ability when played to go off first. But McClunky is an event. You have to resolve the entirety of that card's text before you can add anything else. So McClunky, you got to do the 3 before you do Cad Bane's 1. So just keep that in mind. Also, I've thrown a couple sneak attacks in. This is for 2 reasons. We got Jaba the Hutt. There's going to be 9 tricks in this version of the deck, so we want a decent density of them so that Jaba can find them. And then the Ruthless Raider, which is an absolute menace when you sneak it in. Ruthless Raider also happens to be the only non-underworld unit in this deck, at least in its main deck configuration. It's just so powerful, though. It's one of the best cards against control decks, period. It works so well with sneak attack, which is something we like, especially because we have Jaba in the deck. And, you know, we don't get Cad Bane's ping with it, but it actually does do its own interpretation of that by dealing 2 to a unit. So we just run it, and we're happy about it. We've also got 2 more tricks, 2 waylays. Not much needed to be said there. It's an emergency card. It helps get rid of sentinels. It helps get rid of buffed units or big things that are kind of shutting you down. Again, and Jaba finds it. And then, of course, a new card. Now there are 2 of them. There's going to be an entire section kind of dedicated to this card. I've only put 2 in this deck because it's not really a main strategy here. It's more of like, oh, Jaba found it and it's my only unit and I have Cad Bane in my hand and I'm going to do that next turn. There's a few other things we can do with this card. It is quite powerful, but it is very linear and it doesn't work into all decks, especially decks playing a lot of interaction. So not like the main core of this deck, just something that we help us kind of spike some games sometimes. Past that, we got the Forlom Zuckuss. Forlom's awesome. He can ambush kind of for 5, right? All your ambush units can kind of do +1 because of Cad Bane's ability. So he is very, very good at just helping you stabilize, like he can one-shot something like Sabine if it ever lines up. He can kill all those 3/5s that get played, things like Tech, DJ, right? Well, Tech's a 2/5, but anyway, you get my point. Zuckuss is our beefiest kind of like mid-game unit. Of course, if we can ever ambush with him, we can basically just crush a game. But even without that, he works pretty well as just a way to like play a chunky unit, right? He works with sneak attack as well. It's not the cleanest unit, right? Like it is still just a 5 cost that doesn't do much. In this deck, it does do 1 damage with Cad Bane's ability when you play him, but the deck sometimes just needs a little more oomph to it, and he helps with that. He is also in conjunction with Bosk, something that now there are 2 of them event can kind of cheat out on the second turn of the game. So a turn 2 Zuckuss can be quite devastating for your opponent to deal with. Jaba kind of mentioned it. We got 9 tricks here. We like them. He's Underworld. He gets that damage in. And then, you know, that discount is wild, especially with things like McClunky. You get a 0-cost McClunky. It's absolutely crazy. We've got Hot Shot Blasters to turn him into a more relevant body. This has been the best Jaba deck I've found. He's very slow in a lot of decks, but the fact that you can get damage out of him just for free with Cad Bane's ability, and he can go find probably the best card in the deck, which is McClunky, definitely raises the power level of this card quite a bit. And then all the way at the end there, we've got 4 7-drops. The biggest get this deck got is probably the Cad Bane Legendary from this set. Card's absolutely wild. It is Underworld. You get the damage, which actually helps him then capture, like, he can kind of capture 9 health worth of damage because you can do 1 damage first and then do the capture. This can just be a board wipe against a lot of decks, and a lot of decks just, like, especially unit based, like aggro, or even like these space aggro, like, decks, they're just not going to be able to kill him, and he's just going to wipe their board. He is a fantastic closer. Fennec, I wanted like 1 more, maybe 2 more at some point, like big guys and like big units, right? And she probably is the best one, although there's a few other options. The deck does play a lot of cards of different costs. She can routinely do 6, 7, 8 damage with her attack plus her trigger, so I like it. She's an Underworld as well, so think about like how much damage she can pump out before she even needs to get attacked. If you've got 4 costs plus the 1 from Cad Bane's ability, she can kind of do 5 before she even has to attack. So she has potential to do absurd amount of damage to a unit if you needed to, and often not take any damage back, and be kind of like a pseudo Han in this deck. All right, so we broke down kind of my current configuration. Let's talk a little bit more about specifics. So these are the newest additions. Cad Bane, mentioned a lot about this, but wild against a lot of decks. Now, not fantastic against control decks, because, you know, they might not have a lot to get captured, or they'll be playing things like Fell the Dragon or any other kind of removal that might just be able to trade efficiently with him. But he's a very powerful 7-drop and really works well with this deck. The on attack ability as well, after you capture something, this deck can sometimes struggle with card quantity, and Cad Bane really puts your opponent in a weird position once you get that 7 damage in, and they have to decide, well, do they take a unit back but give you 2 cards? So it's just good. It's just a good unit. Now there are 2 of them is the other one, and this is just to try to spike some games from your opponent. All our turn 1 plays are Underworld, so we do have 6 5-drop Underworlds with Bosk, which I forgot to talk about. Bosk is awesome in this deck. Again, he ambushes, so you get the +1, but we do play a lot of cheap events. Specifically, McClunky is crazy when you have a Bosk out. You get the 3 from McClunky, the 1 from the Cad Bane, and the 2 from the Bosk. It's like a 1-cost overwhelming barrage, does 6 damage potentially. Bosk works wonders in this deck. But yes, we can get him with, now there are 2 of them, or we can get Zuckuss. So those are like our turn 2 cheats. Other than that, it's a trick that helps add density to our Jaba trigger, which then, you know, on our 5 resource turn, we can go get a Cad Bane if we only have 1 Underworld unit, or like the Fennec, right? So those are really the 2 places I'm looking at using it. If it doesn't look like it's going to line up, this is an easy resource, and, you know, it might not end up staying in the deck forever. It's definitely got a lot of upside, but it's kind of clunky as well. So it's something worth messing around with. And then Boba Fett, this isn't really an addition, it's a subtraction, but him being gone changes a lot of the dynamic of like these mid-rangey leaders, especially villain yellow mid-range leaders. It just opens up a lot of space for other decks to come in that were kind of getting dominated by Boba. And in contrast, Cad Bane, who is a pretty good like mid-rangey control, like he controls the board really well against like other unit-based decks, and if those decks start getting more popular, Cad Bane can become quite a good choice. On top of that, the deck had very few good answers to a Boba armor. You basically just had to play bad upgrade removal cards because you would just straight up lose to that card otherwise, and it was just annoying. It was eating up a lot of deck space or sideboard space. So Boba being gone, I think, is just a net positive for a lot of leaders, and Cad Bane is one of them. All right, real quick, because I get asked this a lot, why is this card not in the deck? I don't think this card is any good, personally. This deck is not an aggro deck. I do not play this like an aggro deck. I think you would need quite a lot of damage to add up from a Lady Proxima before it would ever be worth it. On top of that, it's a free kill if a deck wants to kill it, and it's a free ignore if a deck doesn't care. It doesn't help us control the board. So when you play something like this, your opponent ends up just getting to the point where they have more units than one, right? And our goal is always to control that board so that our Cad Bane ability is as effective as possible. We know where that damage is going. The moment you start playing units that don't interact well on the board, his ability just gets worse and worse and worse. The moment that their opponent has 2 or 3 units out, it's done. His ability is kind of irrelevant at that point. So Lady Proxima does not help into that strategy. It only helps into a base race strategy. But again, she is a free kill for a lot of decks if they care, and if they think they can just race you through you dealing 4 or 5 damage from this, then they're just going to ignore it anyway. Control decks are just going to be smiling when you play a 0/4 into them. So overall, I've just never wanted this card in a deck, and that's why it's not here. All right, so the strategy with the pings. Tark Town, let's start with that. You don't have to use it on turn 1. I often do, especially against like a Sabine deck, right? But because removing your opponent's turn 1 play just means like next turn you can play your 3-drop, ping something, maybe trade it with the 2-drop that you played the previous turn, and just kind of keep that train rolling. So, but you don't have to do Tark Town on turn 1. Like if your opponent's unit, let's say they play a Crafty Smuggler and then you play a Crafty Smuggler. Well, not a great example. You can't Tark Town that one anyway. They play like a 3/2 or something, right? Something that your unit can kill without dying back anyway. Then maybe you just don't Tark Town and you save it for their 3-drop, right? You don't have to just lock into, I have to do this on the first unit possible. But that is quite powerful, especially against aggro decks. On top of that, that 5 health that you're losing, I think, is easily saved by the fact that you're just going to be ahead on board. It's also a decent card into control decks because they play less units, and often you just want to be able to remove something, especially sentinels and stuff like that. So Tark Town, incredibly important, and you want to set up your pings as needed. Now, do you pass on turn 1 to enable this? Against Sabine, yes. I always make them play the first unit because they're going to. They can't just claim and skip turn 1. You're happy with that if they do. But you're not going to do this in all cases. Like control decks, if you're going first, you got to do the thing. You got to play a card. It's not a great place to be in if you're just passing and then your opponent claims, if you're not as good of a late game deck as theirs. There are these like middle ground decks though, like Han decks, for instance. Like they might be okay skipping depending on the texture of their hand. This is something you have to play around with. My general, if you have to ask me, my general rule of thumb is like, don't just skip turn 1 and assume they're going to play something into you unless they are like an aggro deck. In many cases, I got a Crafty Smuggler or something in my hand. I'm just going to play it because I can then maintain initiative, and next turn, just play my 3-drop and deal damage to their turn 1 play. Then maybe my Crafty Smuggler can kill it anyway, and I don't even have to use the Tark Town, right? So I think there's a lot of merit to not just passing turn 1 into a lot of decks, but it's something you have to play around with, and you have to start understanding how other decks are combating you, because it's going to change depending on how they're playing as well. Other stuff with like his pings, obviously we talked about ambush, so like here's like Cloud Rider, Forlom Boss, like all the ambush units can kind of do 1 extra, so your Forlom can kill 5 health units, your Boss can kill 5 health units, Cloud Rider can kill 4 health units, but also very importantly, because of ambushes of when played, I mentioned this already, and Cad Bane's ability is a when played, you can resolve whichever one you want in whichever order you want. One example, your opponent has 2 4 health units out and you have a Cloud Rider. Well, you probably make them resolve Cad Bane's ability first, then they deal 1 to one of those, and then you know which one you want to hit with Cloud Rider, right? That's a great choice. Let's say your opponent has a 1 health unit and a 3 health unit. Well, you're going to Cloud Rider into the 3 health unit, resolve the ambush, and then do Cad Bane's ability, and they have to kill their 1 health unit. So these are sequencing things that you just got to get used to with the ambush stuff. It doesn't work with McClunky, right? McClunky, you have to resolve the full 3 damage. But, you know, McClunky is awesome, right? It's 4 damage for 1 resource in this deck, and often we get to bounce back things like Bazine, which gives us more fuel, or Crafty Smuggler maybe after they lost a shield, or even like a Forlum or a Bosk after they've ambushed and then taken some damage. McClunky, awesome. All right, Jaba. So this is a good Jaba deck. We play 9 tricks. They're all like, they're in like 2 camps here, right? McClunky and Waylay are in our like interaction package, and then Sneak Attack, and now there are 2 of them are in our like let's cheat a little bit package. Sneak Attack is much cleaner. We always know what we can sneak attack. Now there are 2 of them is a card that either it's going to be really good on a very specific turn, or it's going to be pretty useless the rest of the time. So, you know, you got a Cad in your hand and you see now there are 2 of them. When you play Jaba, maybe we take that and just plan on Cad Baning next turn. Otherwise, we have like something like Ruthless Raider, or we want to set up like a big burst turn later. The Sneak Attack's a good choice. McClunky is always a good choice unless like your opponent's literally not playing any units, but it's fantastic. You can even bounce your Jaba to get card advantage if you need to. Remember that if you find McClunky with Jaba, you can play it that same turn, which is awesome. It makes it cost 0. And Waylay, just a safe card to have in most yellow decks. And then now there are 2. So we talked about the main synergies. Here they are: Bosk, Zuckuss, and Cad Bane. So turn 2, Bosk and Zuckuss. If we have, now there are 2 in one of those cards, especially if your opponent like started on the ground and you can like Bosk ambush it, or your opponent's playing like a space race deck, then you can just like Zuckuss and try to race them on the ground. I wouldn't do this kind of combo against an interactive deck, because remember, you are kind of 2-for-1ing yourself. You're playing, now there are 2 and the unit, so you've kind of packaged 2 cards into 1 just so you can like get it out early. And if your opponent is able to like interact with that smoothly, you can set yourself back really back. And that's why it is only for very specific situations where you are not expecting crazy interaction from your opponent's side, and you think that getting one of those earlier or 5 drops is going to be effective. And by the same token, Cad Bane, again, you don't want to do this into interactive decks, but into units, like kind of just going wide with units, into decks going wide with units. You play, now there are 2 of them on turn 4 or something. You're going to eat up like 3 units and have a 7/7. They're going to have a really hard time. Like even a Sabine deck who wants to respond to this would have to use their ECL and Poa Wrecker to get through it, and they would lose their Poa Wrecker, so it's not even the end of the world when that happens. So I think it's a very powerful effect to have with Cad Bane specifically. All right, so more stuff. This is a giant pile of card that will be in the sideboard in the link provided for the deck, but things that are worth considering, there's a lot, and there might even be more, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them here, like the new 1 cost discard effect in yellow, right? The conspiracy. You discard one of your own cards, but you get one of your opponents. Now, it costs a lot. It's like very card intensive. You're 2-for-1ing yourself to get 1 card out of your opponent's hand, but I think against certain strategies that might be very powerful, especially more controlling decks. I think Force Choke and No Good to Me Dead are almost certainly going to be in like the 60. I think if I'm not main decking Force Choke, it likely will just be in the sideboard. It is a very clean answer into like Sabine aggro decks and into like mono yellow Han that plays a lot of 5 health units. It's just, I think, a solid card. I'd very much consider it a potential main deck candidate. I think it's just good. No Good to Me Dead as well. I think instead of Waylay, there's some potential there. Unfortunately, it's not a trick, but in the same nature that like Waylay is going to help you in racing situations, I think No Good to Me can sometimes even do a better job, especially I think against like more expensive units like Ruthless Raider that have like when played effects that you don't want bouncing back into your opponent's hands, or like even just very like a Lurking Tie that's gotten buffed. You know, having both No Good to Me Dead and Waylay can go a long way in some cases. I highlighted here Mercenary Gunship, but it goes in conjunction with a lot of these other low-cost underworld space units, like the Unlicensed Headhunter, which like no one ever plays, but I think it's fine. 3/2 Saboteur, and then the Rokai Gunship. If we're seeing an uptick in space race decks, like Red, like think like Boba Red from the previous set. Now it could be like a Django Red, if you see, or like even a Sabine Yellow, things like this, and you just need more space units. I think this deck's got that covered if you want it. You have the options, and I think you can be quite good into those decks if you just tweak. Like I already play, what was it, 8 or 7 space units, cheap underworld space units. And we got McClunky that can reach up there, and Cad Bane's ability can reach up there. But if we wanted even a little more, there's plenty of options. You got the Gunship and the Unlicensed Headhunter, both 3/2s. The Rokai Gunship is a 2/1, but it also has the added effect of when it dies, it deals a damage. So definitely potential and options. Lurking TIE Phantom, not an underworld unit, but probably something we very much want to consider as a sideboard card or a sideboard pivot into control decks. Just a tough card for them to deal with, and they are likely the decks that care the least about you pinging their units. Sometimes they don't play a lot of units, talking like specifically like hard control decks. So Lurking TIE, definitely an option. Another option for like control decks would be Shadowed Intentions. I think this is a very interesting card to just slap on a leader and say, hey, can you kill this with damage now? And some decks might not be able to kill Cad Bane with damage. And this blocks like Power of the Dark Side, Super Laser Blast, Rivals Fall, like all that stuff. Cad Bane, you do this Shadow Intention, maybe you get a Hot Shot Blaster on him and hope he can take you all the way. I think it's worth testing something like this out. Relentless Pursuit, very powerful card. It lets Cad Bane eat Fire Sprays and Ruthless Raiders because they cost 6 and he costs 6. So definitely something I'd look at. There's also a lot of other bounty hunters in the deck in general. So I think Relentless Pursuit is very much on the cusp. Could be a main deck, could be a sideboard card. Same with like Syndicate Lackeys and Gamorrean Guards for that matter. I think Gamorrean Guards is a good card into Sabine, just a 4/4 Sentinel that also deals a damage. Syndicate Lackeys is just another good ambush unit. He can actually defeat 6 health units with Cad Bane's ability, so gives you a little more reach when compared to something like Bosk and Forlom. Some new stuff like Zero the Hut. I think this card can actually be kind of nuts if you bring him out on turn 2 with now there are 2 of them, because you're going to have a 2/8 that exhausts an opponent's resource every turn. That could be kind of wild. I opted not yet to include him in the main deck. It's not going to close out games very efficiently, and it might be kind of a dud if you're not cheating it out with now there are 2 of them, but I think it's worth exploring. Some other stuff at the bottom here, you see a lot of like other big units: Xanadu Blood, Enfys Nest, Savage Opress, Aura Sing. Those are all underworld units. I opted for Fennec currently as like the extra 7s, but I think Aura might be the next one I would try. Savage, probably not, but also a maybe. Enfys Nest, in the same vein as like Syndicate Lackeys, can do 1 extra damage with the ambush, so it's like a 6, but her costing 6 doesn't feel great to me most of the time. Xanadu Blood is a cool card that I think especially if we want to like be able to have more oomph against like space decks, I think getting that involved, especially because it can defeat something like Fet's Fire Spray, is interesting. I put Palpatine here just because we play Sneak Attack, and that's really the interaction I'd be looking at. With Jaba in play, you can actually get him out for 6 resources and do like a 6 damage. It's like playing Overwhelming Barrage and then also hitting your opponent for 6. It's pretty good, and that's like where I look at Palp. Bounty Hunter Crew, he can get Underworld cards. Event, like it's okay. Like there's some stuff he gets events. We're not like our events aren't what's taking us home. He is Underworld, sorry, that's what I meant. But he can bring us back some events. But if we end up also playing like Surprise Strike, which is in this list and in this sideboard maybe list, maybe we look at like bringing Bounty Hunter Crew to try to like get more burst damage. If we opted for like a discard plan post board, I don't currently have any of that here, but think Pillage, Force Surrender, then maybe being able to loop that with Bounty Hunter Crew would be something we'd look at. I put DJ on this list, but it's not because of his ability. It's just because he's a 3/5 Underworld unit. And if we just wanted a 3/5 Underworld unit, he's the next one I would play after Boba Fett. So there's options there. I put a couple upgrade hate stuff that certainly could be something we would need if upgrades become very prominent. So disabling Fang Fighter and Confiscate. And then Shoot First is another trick that I think could see main deck consideration, especially into more aggressive decks. It's very good at creating an efficient trade. Jaba can find it. So a lot of play there. So this is like my first pass, right? These cards might come and go. The deck list is going to almost certainly change soon, right? I mess around with the decks all the time. That's like that you see in real time happen on my Patreon. So if you want to see like how this deck evolves over time, that's where that will happen. But yeah, I think Cad Bane could be decently well positioned. I'm not going to make any predictions right now. I don't know where the meta is going to go, and like what decks are going to become popular. And there's like just a big power void to fill now with Boba gone. So I don't want to like promise that this is going to be the next best thing, but I think it can be certainly pretty good. It was pretty good in set 2, and I can't imagine it got worse with the ban to Boba. So something I'm pretty excited to try. Hope you will be too. So let me know what you think about this deck, about any cards that you think maybe I'm forgetting about or missing, any interactions that you've really liked. It'd be cool to hear. But yeah, hope you enjoy it. And until next time, take care.